One of the new features in ZBrush 2020 is the ability to adjust your Polypaint using a tool set that's found under the Polypaint menu option called Adjust Colors. So if I click Adjust Colors, it's going to bring up this UI. It looks quite similar to the Noisemaker UI. You'll navigate here in this window just like you do in ZBrush with the same hotkeys. Now, before we do any masking, if we were to adjust the sliders here, you can see that we can globally shift things like the HSV hue. We can adjust saturation. We can adjust intensity. We can also do RGB. We can adjust R, G, and B individually. And of course, we can do contrast, red contrast, green contrast, etc. So this is a really nice way to do variations on your color. If you just click OK, it will apply those changes to the mesh. So it's a nice way, perhaps if you're trying to do variations, or if you're sitting with an art director or a director and they want to see some real-time adjustments, you can do those global adjustments using the Adjust Color slider. I'm going to click Reset, and that will reset everything back to its original state. Now let's say that we want to actually isolate certain areas here. We'll do that by clicking on one of these swatches and then dragging over, and that will create a mask selection. So here I've masked out this particular hue of skin. I can turn that on and off. I can adjust the tolerance up and down to increase what's actually being masked. We'll grab another one here. We'll grab, let's say, this hue right here, which is very, very similar. Dial that back. Now if I invert the mask, I can see what I'm actually masking here. You see that it's actually getting a little bit more of the green than I might have intended. So let's turn that one off. Let's clear the mask. And let's do another selection. Let's select just the green here. Let's turn up that tolerance. So you can see what this is actually doing. It's masking out these particular areas. Let's come down here and grab this. Let's turn that tolerance up. Now it's very, very sensitive there, so let's just turn that up a little bit and let's blur that mask. There we go. So you see we're starting to get a pretty good mask selection here. Let's go ahead and select this area here. Now that's grabbing too much, so we'll turn our tolerance up or down. There we go. Turn our tolerance down, and that should get us what we're looking for. We've got everything but the sort of peachy tones isolated. Now, if I invert my mask, it will literally invert what is masked. I can hide the mask if I don't want the mask getting in the way, but it's still actually there. Now I can do variations here, and as I make these changes, you'll see that it's only being applied to the masked area. So I can shift the skin here around the face and give it more of a pinkish hue. Let's zoom into that a bit. Maybe I want to adjust the saturation. We'll turn the saturation up on that and then click OK. Clear that mask, and you see that that change has been propagated into the Polypaint on the character. Now I can still use this mask if I undo the mask return, so it's actually kind of a nice way to mask based on Polypaint. So if we go back into Adjust Colors, the mask will remain. If I click Reset, it'll reset my sliders. And let's go ahead and shift that up a little bit, bring it more towards green. Bring the slider down in here, grab that purple. Let's adjust that tolerance and just get the eye and mouth area. Let's invert the mask, and now we can adjust those purple hues. Maybe we want to, let's hide the mask so we can see things better. I always find it easier to see if I have the mask hidden and I can watch the color change on the surface. So let's adjust that RGB intensity. Bring that down. Maybe let's increase the reds in that or bring some blue into it. You see that we can do lots of little subtle changes here. Turn up the intensity, turn down the intensity. When we're happy with that, click OK, clear the mask, and now we've got this nice sort of speckling pattern happening on the face. Now this is really, really useful, but I'll show you another thing you can do with it. If I go to my subtools, I have a separate subtool here. And on this one, I've created some sort of tribal markings or tattoos using the new Deco brush that's in ZBrush 2020. So let's do the same thing here. Let's go to Polypaint and turn on Adjust Colors. Now I'm going to select this purple hue here, and if I inverse the mask, you'll see what I'm getting there is actually the tattoos. I'll blur the mask, and that'll help give me a little sort of vignette, a little faded edge around the changes that I make here. Let's turn that up. And if we hide colors, we can actually see the color, the mask that we're getting. Right now, I can't see it very well because I need to cancel out of this and set my color back to white. Then go back to Adjust Colors, and here you go. As I blur that mask, you can see the effect that that's having. As I change the tolerance, turn this down and up, I can sharpen that down a little bit. And there we go. Let's show colors again. And now we can hue shift those tattoos. Let's bring them, let's say, up a little bit into the sort of reddish area. Let's hide the mask so we can see things a little bit better. If I adjust tint, I can fade them slightly, which makes them feel kind of a little bit more like tattoos. And if you look, because I feathered that mask, see that mask is feathered there, and I adjusted the tolerance, I can get that nice kind of edging where it's a little bit more saturated along the edge of the tattoo, so it's giving me sort of a two-toned effect. Click OK, and now that has applied to the mesh. That was applied to the Polypaint on the mesh, I should say. Now this is something very, very cool. This mask exists right now on the mesh, so I can go to Deformation, go down to Inflate. Let's turn the Inflate slider up, and we can actually create sculptural dimension that corresponds to those markings that are Polypaint. Or if we to negatively inflate that, it'll be more like a scarification. Let's turn off the visibility on the other subtool there. And that way we can actually see that negative deformation. Go to Inflate and pull that in, and now those are going to be inset as though they were perhaps some kind of scarification on the creature. Clear the mask, and there you see we have now sculptural form corresponding exactly to our Polypaint lines. So that is the Adjust Color tool located under the Polypaint menu. If we go into the Masking menu, we also have under Mask by Color, Mask by Polypaint, and that brings up the same menu, but we don't have the hue adjustments here. So what I can do now is I can come in here and I can make a Polypaint selection like this. I can adjust my tolerance, turning that up and down, or I can turn that off and then I can just do a selection of the skin tones, like the lighter skin tones, the more human range of skin tones here, and then the greens, the more alien skin tones, I can isolate just by tweaking this slider here. We'll grab that eye area there and adjust our tolerance there just so we get just that area. Now we click OK, and that applies a mask to those areas. So I can invert that mask, and perhaps I want to create a different type of skin texture just on this area. If I go to the Surface submenu and open up Noisemaker, go to Edit. Now you see I've got noise applied on here. Let's maybe adjust the strength of that just a little bit, adjust the scale. Click OK, and now we'll apply that to the mesh. Now when we clear the mask, you see that skin texture is applied just to those areas that we had masked out. So that interface is quite handy. It's a very, very useful way to isolate areas based on their color, hue, saturation values. If you're using it under the Polypaint menu, you can actually do real-time adjustments to your color. If you just want to mask, then you're going to be using it under the Masking menu, Mask by Polypaint. So let's take a look at another new feature in ZBrush 2020. Let's switch back to our original version of this creature that does not have the scarification. I'm going to step down a couple subdivision levels and then go to UV Map, and I'm going to click MorphUV. Now this character has UV coordinates assigned to it. I'm going to turn on solo so we don't see the eyeballs floating in space there. So I created UVs on this character using UV Master. And if you want to learn more about UV Master, just watch the video that's specifically for UV Master. Now, you can actually sculpt and paint here in this flattened view now. If I go to B for brush, D for deco, and let's select the deco curve dot brush here, and I'll select alpha 1, and let's go ahead and grab a purple. Now, if I wanted to draw, let's turn on RGB, and we can actually draw curves right here on the surface. Click and drag, and then that's going to paint in this flattened view. So let's undo that and make our brush a bit smaller. And let's go ahead and draw a curve along this temple here. We'll draw another one here. And we can move down towards the neck. Oops. Let's turn off our X symmetry. There we go. Draw another one here. And let's draw down this way and draw down this way. So you see we're actually able to paint right here in the MorphUV view. I'll turn off RGB and turn on Z Add, and we can actually sculpt in this view as well, as you can see here and here. Now when I'm finished, I'll press MorphUV again, and that will return the mesh to its original state, and you can see those strokes are applied to the mesh. I'll step back up to my highest subdivision level, and there they are. Now that little vignette we've got there is simply an artifact of the material, so I'm just going to click and drag from my material menu just to make sure that I fill the head with the correct material right there, which is just the startup material. So let's take a look at that again. I'm at the highest subdivision level now. I'll go back down to UV Map, MorphUV. Here you can see we're looking at the character flattened out. And let's go ahead and do some more sort of scarification. We'll draw a little scar here. Click and drag. Actually, we want that to go in, so let's turn on sub, and that scar will carve in. Here as well. Draw one there, and draw one there. I've always been a big fan of the deco brush. It's really nice for creating these sort of sweeping curves. It's also really nice for doing drapery and folds in drapery. Let's go ahead and turn off MorphUV, and here you can see those strokes as applied to the mesh. Now, this is particularly nice if you need to paint down a seam on a piece of clothing, for example, or you want to place things sort of very precisely that need to wrap around a surface. So it'd be kind of hard to carry a stroke around the surface this way, but if I MorphUV it flat, let's go back to the top of the head here. Turn off perspective. There we go. And let's go back to RGB. And I can carry a stroke from one side of the head all the way over to the other side of the head. Just like so. Tap somewhere off the curve to get rid of it. MorphUV. And here you see that curve carries all the way over. So let's take a look at this on a piece of clothing. Here we've loaded in a garment which actually has UVs applied to it. So if we go to UV Map and then MorphUV, we can view the flattened out UV planes. Now what I want to do is I want to create a seam running down the top of each arm. So to do that, I'll go to B for brush and S for stitch. Now I could select the Stitch Basic brush here, but I actually think there's a better brush for this type of garment. I'm going to go to the Lightbox brush menu, and inside there you'll find a Stitch submenu. If I open that, I'm going to grab Stitch 3. Now I will go to the Stroke menu. I will go to Lazy Mouse. I'm going to turn on Backtrack, turn on Line, turn on snap to track, and turn track curvature all the way up. Now what this is going to do, it's going to conform my stroke to a straight line. If you want to learn more about track curvature and backtrack, watch the video specifically on lazy mouse and backtrack in the stroke menu. So with the brush set up like this, I'm going to click and drag, and it's going to draw a straight line. Then I'm going to backtrack along that line, and that will give me my seam. Now, it's a little big. I think I want to change the size of it. So what I will do here is I will change my draw size as soon as it's finished auto-saving. There we go. Let's undo that, and let's turn our draw size down. And now we will draw this seam again. And there we go. If we zoom in, see we get a nice seam running right along there. Let's do another one along the other arm. Start from the top of the shoulder, bring it down to the wrist, and then backtrack. Actually, I believe it should go here. Oops. If you want to avoid that rotation that just happened there, what you want to do is lock your camera, and that way I can't accidentally rotate. There we go, and we'll run that seam right there. Now I backtracked twice across that one, so it's going to be a little bit bigger than the other one. Let's MorphUV, let's unlock our camera, and then look at those seams we just placed. So here you can see there's the slightly larger one running perfectly down the top of that arm. On the other arm, again, this one's slightly softer. We have a seam running straight down the length of that arm, and that would be very, very tricky to get perfect there if we were doing it in 3D view, because we'd have to use the lazy mouse or the line and kind of hope for the best, because the line, when it's dimensional, doesn't run straight down the length as easily. It has to conform around this curve here, and you can't do that with a straight line in 3D view. But because we can go to MorphUV now, and we can actually sculpt and paint in MorphUV mode, it makes things like this much, much, much easier. So let's undo. Let's go back and let's undo those two seams. And let's say we want to, let's put some color in there. Let's do material, or let's do Z add and RGB. Let's turn on Z sub so the seam goes in instead of out. And let's sample this color here and darken it a little bit so our seam will be polypainted slightly darker. Let's draw that line straight down and then backtrack. Let's come here, draw that line straight along, and then backtrack. Now if we MorphUV back, here you see we get that seam again running perfectly down the length of the arm, and this time we've got color as well as sculpture in there. Let's say we wanted to paint a stripe going straight around the arm. Let's MorphUV it back flat. And here we can, let's do the same thing. Let's go to the standard brush. Let's select nice hard-edged alpha here. And let's do maybe a red stripe. Go to stroke, turn on lazy mouse, backtrack, line, snap to track, and turn up track curvature. Let's turn up our draw size and change our focal shift. And then we're just going to draw that band right across this way. Oops, make sure that we have RGB turned on and not Z add. There we are. MorphUV, and here you see we've created a perfect band going around that arm. Now if I wanted to do that in 3D view, it would be much, much more difficult. Let's MorphUV and do it on the other arm now. Oops, once again, make sure that we don't rotate the camera by accident. There we go. MorphUV, and here we have a band. It's running a little bit catty corner, so let's undo that, and let's try and adjust its placement like this. No, still not quite right, so let's undo that and run it like this. There we go. That's better. So you see we get that banding running all the way around the sleeve, which would be, again, quite difficult to do in three-dimensional mode. Let's do something here. Let's go back to MorphUV and do something in the central panel here. Maybe we want to do a stripe of red running straight down the center. Let's draw that line and backtrack. MorphUV, and there we go. So it's really handy and sort of brings ZBrush's painting in line with some other 3D paint applications like Mari, where you can paint in UV view. So not only can you paint in here, but you can also sculpt in this UV mode, which is pretty exciting and extremely useful. And I think as you explore this more, you'll find your own uses for this particular tool set. So thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next chapter.